Okay. Oma kum len lablat gemoret Motzei Shabbos Parshas Bereishis on the Vorchim Mar Cheshvan. Today's blot is Daf Lamed Beis. We'll commence from Daf Lamed Aleph on the Beis, about 10 lines from the bottom. Omar Shmuel. In the Mishnah, we learned about a house that's filled with payers that was all closed up. The bricks were sitting on top of each other, but they weren't really sealed. There was no cement. So with the Rabbanan, you're not allowed to break it down for the sake of breaking it down. But if it opens on its own, you can go ahead and you can take from the fruits. And we don't call it muktzeh machmas issa because you're not allowed to demolish it, because Rashi says since the whole issa of dismantling it was only with the Rabbanan, because it wasn't permanent really, therefore we don't have this concept of muktzeh. Rameir goes further. He says you can go demolish the house and take out whatever fruits you want. That's what we had. He said, if you have, let's say, doors to a cellar, that's so the door is tied down permanently, but the door is meant to be open and closed all the time. So the rope that holds it down, you can open the knot, because it's not really a permanent knot. It's a door that you open all the time to get to the cellar, to have your wine there, whatever it is. And avaloi mafkia, you're not allowed to unravel the rope. Nor can you cut the rope through, because there is stira and binyan, there's building and there's stira and breaking when it comes to permanent fixtures like things in the karka. However, shebekalim, if let's say it's a door to a cupboard, a portable cupboard, and we learned already before that there's no building and there's no demolishing when it comes to kalim. But shebekalim, so if it's a door attached to a portable cupboard, matir, you can untie the rope, for sure you can, but even mafkia, you can unravel it, you cut right through, because there's no building or demolishing when it comes to kelim. But then he goes a step further, echad Shabbos ve'echad Yom Tov. Not only on Yom Tov, but even on Shabbos. So the difference is not Shabbos and Yom Tov, the difference is whether it's karka, it's a permanent fixture, then there's building and destruction, or whether it's a portable item, so there's no building, there's no demolition by that. Mace will ask you a question. We learned in a Beitza the following. That these doors that are attached to something on the ground, on Shabbos, Mati, you're allowed to open the knot. You can't unravel, you can't cut. Exactly what Shmuel said. But here's the difference. Be Yom Tov, you said, Shmuel, no difference, Shabbos and Yom Tov. But here it says, on Yom Tov, a door to something that's on the ground, Mati, you can untie it, Umafki, you can unravel, you cut right through. There's a difference between Shabbos and Yom Tov. But Shmuel, you said there is no difference Shabbos and Yom Tov. How can that be? So we answer, Hamani Rab Meir, the author of this Beitza is actually Rab Meir of our Mishnah, and therefore Rab Meir in our Mishnah says that on Yom Tov there's no issue. The Amar, he believes, Av Poiches Lechatchila, you can open that house that has those bricks surrounding it, and it's all closed off. You can go ahead and open it. So he holds also on Yom Tov you're allowed to unravel the rope. But upligi Rabbanah, in our mission, the Rabbanah say you cannot go ahead and demolish it yourself. It's only if it opened on its own. I'm following the view of the Rabbanah. Says the Gemara, you think the Rabbanah are actually arguing? You think the Rabbanah would argue in a case when it comes to these doors that are attached to the ground, and the Rabbanah would say that even on Yom Tov you cannot rip the rope. But Tanya, we learn clearly in the Beitza. Even though they're arguing about this house that has these bricks lined up, if you can demolish it or not to get into the food, but the Chacham agreed to Rameh when it comes to Chaysama Shebekarka, door that's attached by this rope to the ground. Shebe Shabbos Matin, on Shabbos you can open it. You cannot unravel, you cannot cut it. But be Yom Tov Matir Mafkiv on Yom Tov you can. So Shmuel, when you said that on Yom Tov as well as Shabbos you cannot unravel the rope, who are you following? Not the Rabbanan, because they agree with Rab Meir when it comes to...
What's the difference between untying and unraveling?
Untying means you're untying the knot. Unraveling means unraveling the rope itself. You're taking the rope, a rope is made of a bunch of strands, and you're opening up the strands. In other words, you're demolishing the object itself.
So unraveling is demolishing and untying is not.
Untying is just a problem of the permanent knot you're not allowed to untie. So we're saying it's not a permanent knot because it's a door. It's meant to be open and closed all the time. So that is that aside. Now we're talking about demolishing. There's two kinds of destroying. One is by unraveling the rope, and one is just taking a knife and cutting right through instead of untying it. Both of them, you're destroying the rope. Says the Gemara, you're right. But Huda Amar, he follows Kahaitan. He follows another brisa. And that's what Shmuel is doing. He's following the other brisa. And what's that? The Tanya, we learned another brisa. These doors that are tied down to the ground, matted, you can open the knot, as we said before. Everyone agrees. You cannot unravel, you cannot cut through it. Echad Shabbos, the Echad Yom Tov. So this brisa holds there's no difference Shabbos and Yom Tov, and Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Shmuel is following, and Shmuel is following the brisa. And he says, what about the door that's attached to this portable cupboard, the box? B'Shabbos, on Shabbos, matir, you can untie it, and Shabbos matir, avaloi mafkia v'loi chayt. You cannot unravel, you cannot cut. Now this is going to be a problem because Shmuel follows the first part of the brisa, as we just said. He says, but Shmuel said, when it comes to the door of a portable cupboard, he says there's no building, there's no destroying, and he holds you allowed to unravel the rope when it comes to a portable cupboard, even on Shabbos. But the brisa says he cannot, and that's going to be a difficulty to Shmuel. The second half of the brisa says the Gemara in the brisa it says Ushebekli Shabbos on this portable keli on Shabbos mati you can tie it avaloi mafkiya l'chaytich, you're not allowed to unravel, you're not allowed to cut through, but the Yom Tov matir mafkiya v'chaytich. On Yom Tov, you can do everything. So the Gemara says, Tiratz Charesha, very nice. The first part of the brisa aligns with you, Shmuel. Elaseifa Kasha, but the second part of the brisa doesn't align with you because you hold when it comes to a door of a portable cupboard, there's no construction, there's no destruction, do whatever you want. Here it says clearly that on Shabbos, you cannot cut through the rope. So he says, you're right. This is a third opinion which we had in the Gemara Shabbos, which is Ram Nechemia, the strictest of them all. The concern here is not the rope. The concern is the knife that you are using. Ram Nechemia is of the opinion, which thankfully, halachically, we don't follow at all. He holds that even a kli shemalachta leheter, even a spoon, a fork, a utensil which is used only for permitted things, you can only use it for its primary purpose. You can only use a fork to eat. You cannot use a fork as a paperweight because that's not its primary purpose. So therefore, Rab Nechemia's problem here is on Yom Tov, the knife that you're using, you should use it to cut meat, not to cut a rope. That's what why Rab Nechemia has a problem with unraveling or cutting through. The problem is not the rope itself. The problem is the knife that you're using. And that we don't follow Rab Nechemia. That's why Shmuel has no issue. What's the story? He said, all the kelim you cannot use on Shabbos and Yom Tov, only the primary use. Says the Gemara, so Rab Nechemia, if it's Rab Nechemia, so Ma'ir Shabbos, why does he say that on Shabbos it's a problem unraveling and cutting through the rope because the knife should only be used for food and not for cutting rope? So why should Yom Tov be different? How come the Bryce says, but on Yom Tov you can't cut through the rope? If the problem is the knife, then the knife shouldn't be used on Yom Tov either. It should only be used for primary use. If you're going to tell me that if you're going to tell me that Rab Nechemia holds that on Shabbos we are stricter than on Yom Tov, that on Shabbos you cannot use the knife or the fork or the spoon, only for its permitted use, but on Yom Tov is more relaxed. You could use the knife to cut through a rope. It's not true, because Mishanile, does he really believe there's a difference? But Tani Chad, we learned in one brisa, Masikin Bekelim, we learned in one brisa, that you're allowed to heat up vessels on Yom Tov. You're allowed to move them around as muktzah. But the ein masikin b'shivri kelim, but broken, let's say, shard, clay shards, you cannot use because prior to Yom Tov you thought you'll use as a utensil. You had no intention of using it as firewood. So if it breaks on Yom Tov, you cannot use it as firewood because it's muktzah. And you can use it for the fire, it doesn't matter. But yesterday you didn't anticipate using it for the fire, so therefore it is muktzah. And yet, V'tanya Idich, in another brayso we learned, Masikin, you can use for your firewood, Bein B'kelim, whether it's a complete utensil, Bein B'shivri Kelim, even a broken part of the utensil, broke on Yom Tov itself. They don't believe in Muktzah. And V'tanya, in the third brayso, Ein Masikin, you cannot use Loi Kelim B'loshkim, can't use anything. So the first brayso says you can only use complete vessel because they're not Muktzah, but you cannot use broken ones because that's Muktzah. Because prior to Yom Tov they were complete and you had no intention of using it broken. The second brisa says you can use it always. No, they don't believe in muktzah. And the third brisa says you can never use it. Now, who's the author of the third brisa? Umeshane, you answered them, like kasha, it's not an issue. Rabbi Yehuda, the first brayse is Rabbi Yehuda believes in muktzah, so you cannot use the broken parts of the vessel. Rab Shimon, the next brayse is Rab Shimon says that you could use the broken parts, and Rab Nechemia who says that you cannot use anything only for its primary use. And we're talking about Yom Tov here, so we see clearly from here that Rab Nechemia holds that even on Yom Tov, a fork and a spoon and a knife can only be used for its primary use. So how can this brayse be Rab Nechemia and says on Yom Tov you can cut through the rope? Says Rab Shmuel, no problem. Today, Tanoi, a libid Rab Nechemia. The two Tanoim arguing what Rab Nechemia would hold when it comes to Yom Tov. The brayse that I'm relying on holds that Rab Nechemia says that on Yom Tov you could cut through rope. Just we don't follow Rab Nechemia. And this other brayse believes Rab Nechemia holds there's no different Shabbos in Yom Tov. Any tool that you use has to be used for its primary purpose. Okay, next Mishnah. Ein poichesin es haner. The way Rashi learns is they had a piece of clay, a lump of clay, and they put the fist and lean their fist inside that clay, which hasn't dried yet. So they made a big mound or a big cavity there. And then later, when it dried, and they would put it in the oven to bake, and they would then put oil and wicks, and that was a candle holder. So you're not allowed to according to Rashi, you're not allowed to put your hand there and press it down to make that form, because you're creating a keli, a vessel. You're making a vessel, you're not allowed to make a kli on Yom Tov like on Shabbos. Number one. Number two, you're not allowed to try to make coal on Yom Tov. That would take pieces of wood out of the fire and let it cool down and turn into coal, because people who used to melt down gold didn't want to have a proper fire. They would use these hot coals. So for them, it's like a complete keli. You just completed an object. And number three, the ein choitchin es hapsila. You're not allowed to cut down a wick so that should burn properly, because again, when you're finishing an item that makes it ready to be used, that's like you're creating a keli on Yom Tov. Rabbi Yehuda says, choitcha be'ur. You can cut the wick with a fire. What exactly it means, we'll soon see. Says the Gemara, first of all, Man Tana the Psichas who said that just by forming the candle holder, even though you didn't place it in the oven yet to bake it, to make it proper, who holds that's already considered a completed keli? I'm going to base made this follows Buddha made it. Tani we learned clay cheres, because remember when it comes to the laws of tumah, something is not receptive or vulnerable to makabel tumah unless it's a completed keli. Unless it's completed. So he says over here,
why should we be questioned about making it clear on Yom Tov? That the only permission or anything on Yom Tov is oichel nefesh.
Exactly. So that's what he's telling you. You're not allowed to do these things, even though you're allowed to, let's say, light a fire. You would think, well, since these are all supporting it.
Yeah, but why is even asking that? We know that the klal is oichel nefesh levad.
You'll soon see. But generally the rule is that, remember, Rabbi Yehuda says you could do machshirim. Remember Rabbi Yehuda. And according to the halach is actually like Rabbi Yehuda. You could do machshirei oichel nefesh, not just food, but things that are supporting food. You're allowed to do in Yom Tov if you couldn't do it before. In this case here, the reason why by the candle holder, for example, you would have thought you can do it is because it's not really completed yet. You still have to put it in the oven to bake it. It's only part of the process, but it sort of could be used already. So it comes to tell you that's considered you completed it. You completed a stage, and that's considered already completed. You cannot do it. In fact, the Gemara asks, how do you know that this is considered completed a stage? It's already ready to be called a keli. Because we're going to draw a parallel from the laws of tumah. By tumah, we say that it's not receptive to makabel tumah unless it's a complete keli. And Rameh is the one who says, clay cheres.
Yeah, Shavua, it's over to you. I've got a problem you can solve. Can you send me a copy of your granddaughter's article? I'll tell you why. I promised it to send to Sharona and to Nama, and somebody borrowed it.
Okay. We learned clay cheres. If you have earthenware, from when do we say that it's now receptive, that it can be kabel tumah? So it says when it's completed. In other words, when you made the cavity, you can place things inside there. Give it a meir. Rabbi Yeshua says, that's not good enough. A receptacle is not good enough. You have to actually place it in the oven and finish it completely. So we see Rameir holds, even though you didn't go through the final stage, but if it's already usable, it's considered Gemar Keli. That's the Chiddush of our Mishnah, that this is considered the Gemar Keli, that stage, right? Even though you didn't place it in the oven. Amle Abaye Abaye. Of course, Rabbi Yosef cannot say a full statement without Abaye interrupting him and asking a question. Amle Abaye, Memai. How can you draw a parallel from Tumah to our case? You know what I made over there, the Chazal Kabbalah Midi. Over there indicate it's a big utensil, even though you didn't place it in the oven. So therefore, you cannot really put wet things in there because it'll be moist and it'll ruin the whole thing. But dry things, for example, you can place in there to store. Over here, it's a candle holder. As long as you didn't put it in the oven, you can't put oil in a wick because the whole thing will fall apart. It's still moist and everything else. So who said that's considered a keli? Answer the Gemara, yes. You can still put coins inside this little candle holding. That's a small thing. So it still has a use. It can still serve the purpose of being a vessel, a keli. Okay, says the Gemara further. Others say another version. In fact, the author of our Mishnah is Rabbi Elazar bar Tzadok. What's his story? Now we learn Alfasin, Charanias, you have these, they call these frying pans from the villages. So they weren't very particular about having nice sets of cutlery and nice sets of dishes. So they had a big plate. And even though it wasn't very, very nice and it was flat, and still they would eat directly from that flat thing which they used to grill on or cook on, and then used to eat straight directly from it. They didn't wait until they actually put it in the oven and baked it and made it, a final product. Is to hide this by element. When it comes to an oil, the laws of oil is that if there's a dead body, there's a corpse there, or a kazayas of a dead body, or a vias of blood, and or from a sheretz, and there's other vessels that share a common roof, the tumah spreads from that, whatever it is emanating the tumah, to that keli. And there the pasuk says it has to be a keli, a vessel that has a toich, that has a receptacle. Because it's a flat, it won't be mekabel tumah in an oil. But utmei is b'masa zav. But if a zav, somebody who had an emission, and he is tummy, if he shakes it or if he touches it, it will become tummy. Even though it's flat, it becomes tummy because it has a use. It's still a keli because people can eat directly from it. Rabbi Elazar bar Tzadok says, after Hayd is b'masa zav. Rabbi Elazar bar Tzadok says that it's tar. Why? Because when nigma malach, it has to have some kind of receptacle. This is just flat, but it seems from here. But once you make a little cavity inside the keli, then it's good enough, even though you didn't place it in the oven. So the author of our Mishnah that says that if you pound it and you made a little cavity there, so you can place things there, even though you didn't put it in the oven, it's considered already complete. Abai asked, according to this version, the same question. Dilma, perhaps, could you put things inside it? What can you place inside a little candle holder when if you didn't place it in the oven, you can't put the oil and wick there? What else can you put there? Why is it called a keli? Why is it deemed to be a keli? Because you can put coins in there. Said the Rabban, talking about these alfas and charenis. You're not allowed to pound in there and make that, but we just said that cavity. Nor can you make these flat, like these grilled, the frying things in these villages, because they used to use it as a plate as well. And biyamtiv is an yamtiv. Charenis, my charenis. What kind of word is charenis? What does that even mean? Says the Gemara, it means these villages. These plates for these farmers, for these villagers, they were very simple people. They didn't need anything nice dishes or anything else. For them, that was treated as a dish. Then the Mishnah said, you're not allowed to make coal because you're making a final product. You're making coal, you're creating coal, you're taking it out of the fire, you're letting it sit and cool down and use it as coal. Pshita, obviously you're not allowed to. Lemai chazi. You can't do it because it has no other use. What could you use it for? Says the Gemara. Of course, one asks a question: what purpose can the coal serve? So why would you think you're allowed to do it? You must say, no, it has a purpose to give it to the people who have bathhouses, so they would go ahead and heat up the water. They used to use coal as well to heat up the water. And an Yom Tov leBoy b'yom. Says the Gemara, boy b'yom yishari. Since when are you allowed to heat up a bath to take a bath on Yom Tov? In fact, even water that was heated up on the end of Yom Tov, you now take a bath on Yom Tov. All you're allowed to do on Yom Tov is to, if it was heated up before Yom Tov, is to do a limb at a time. And I told you some people want to say that a shower is considered a limb at a time because it's not like a bath that you immerse yourself completely. It's only parts get washed. Kidamar Rabbi says lahaziyah. We're talking about to like a sauna. They used to heat up the bathhouse. They used to go in and sit there like a sauna. And we learning more brachas. There was a period, if you remember, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, he would go light, Daven Ma'ariv, Mekabel Shabbos, and then go to the sauna before he went home. Because at that time, it's only afterwards when they realized that the people were cheating and they said they heated up the water for the sauna, and actually they were heating up the baths. On Yom Tov, so therefore they stopped. Or on Shabbos. The Koidim Gzeda, Hachanam Azir Koidim Gzeda, we're talking about before the Gzeda, so therefore when they were allowed to have a sauna, so you would think you're allowed to, the coal has a purpose on Yom Tov to heat up the water for the sauna, not to take a bath. Kamash Malan, that no, because you're making a kavi. Second one further, you're not allowed to cut a wick into two. Why can't you use a knife? And Rabbi Yehuda says you can use a fire to make the wick. So why can't you, what do you call it? Why is a knife the law? If you have a long wick, you cannot cut the wick in the middle to use it as 2 wicks. Because you made a final product. You now make a final product on Yom Tov. Now you have 2 wicks. And if you use a match and you, let's say, a candle you light right between and you have now 2 wicks, you're still creating a cake. What's the difference? Use a knife of using a fire? Why should it be any different? He said, what you did was you take the wick and you take the wick and you put both ends on 2 different candles and 2 different candles. And then what you have 2 different candle holders. You take this long wick, you put one on one candle holder and one on the other candle holder, and then you light right in the middle. So it looks like you're trying to light the wick. As a result of that, you have now 2 wicks, but it doesn't look like you're trying to cut through. It looks like you're trying to light the wick, and therefore you permit it. And furthermore, it's like a dovashay miskaven. Your intention is not to create 2 wicks. Your intention is to light the wick. As a result, you have 2 wicks. Says the Gemara. He says you're allowed to be moichet a wick on Yom Tov. Says the Gemara, my moichet. What do you mean you're allowed to be moichet? What's moichet? You're allowed to remove chosh. Sometimes at the top of the wick you have this this coal that sits there on top of the wick and makes it not coal, but the burnt out part of the wick and therefore it's difficult to light. You're allowed to flick it off. Remove the choshech, remove the part that obstructs the fire. You're allowed to do that in order to burn better. We learned before you're not allowed to extinguish a fire on Yom Tov, but here you're not extinguishing the fire. You're just removing the piece of the coal. It's not burning, and then you're talking about removing. It's not burning right now, so you're not extinguishing it. You're removing it so that you can light better, and that you can do. If you're not creating a keli, you're just enhancing it. So I think I'm going to first based on that. 6 laws said regarding a wick on Yom Tov. Gimel lahachmet, 3 are there to be stringent. The Gimel hakol, 3 to be lenient. Lahachmet, what's to be stringent? Ein goydlin oisa lechatchil b'yom. You're not allowed to spin a wick on Yom Tov. Number 1, and number 2, the ein mahavin oisa ba'ur. You're not allowed to light it to make it, to make it burn better. So when you light it again, it burns better. Ein choytchin oisa l'shnayim. Nor can you cut it into 2 because you're creating 2 wicks. But lahakol, what's the leniency? Number 1 is you're allowed to put your hand and press on it and flatten it out, especially if you make a wick out of, let's say, a cotton, so you can flatten it out. You're not spinning it, you're just flattening it. Number 2, you're allowed to soak it in oil so that it should burn better. And you're allowed to also use the fire to create the 2 wicks, like we learned before in the name of Rabbi Yehuda. Now, this is very interesting. But Amar Rab Nosson, the Gemara in Bay has very little agada, so they threw a few little pieces in just to whet our appetite. But Amar Rab Nosson Barab, Rab Nosson, the son of Abba, said, Amar Rab, the name of Rab, Atide Bavel, all the wealthy people in Bavel, Yardei Gehenim Hen. They are all going to end up in Gehenim. Why is that? So Rashi says because they did not have compassion when it came to tzedakah and helping other Jews out. Kiha, like the following incident, did Shapsoi Bar Marinus. We only have one other place in Shas, not exactly sure he was. Ikala Bavel. He once came to Bavel. Boa Menayu Iska. He wanted people to invest with him in his business and he would share the profits. And nobody wanted to. Now that isn't the bad part. Why should they? I mean, they don't know who he is. Why would they invest with him? But then he said, okay, Bezayin amazing. I need to eat. Can somebody please give me food? Nami loizinu. Nobody gave him food. Omar. So he concluded, you don't want to help me out. Hani me'edev Rav Ka'asa. I can only come to one conclusion. that all these people in the bubble are descendants from the Erev Rav who left Egypt. These were the Egyptians who converted.
Is this the famous Shabsat Tzvi?
Shabsai Tzvi. Shabsai Tzvi lived in the times of the Taz. Shabsai Tzvi lived around 1660, the year 1660. The Gemara was written in the year about 350 CE. How it's a little bit of a problem.
A little bit different.
Okay.
Okay, no, don't do that.
I just saw the name. Yeah. Okay, I just saw the name Shabsai. I thought maybe that's why they didn't want to give him anything.
No. Actually, the Shabsai Tzvi initially was so persuasive that the Taz, Rav Dovra Levi Segel on Shulchan Aruch, wrote him a letter of endorsement and the most beautiful letter of flattery. It was only a number of years later that he realized who Shabsai Tzvi really was, and he retracted. But his letter that he supported him, unfortunately, was much more proliferated around the world than his letter of retraction. Anyway.
Why is he making such a wide statement that all the wealthy of above will go to Gehenna? Why is he talking about all everyone's?
The Gemara is giving an example.
Socialist.
No, the Gemara is giving an example. It's trying to say is that we know that the people in bubble were not so generous. You ask anybody, they'll tell you that the Melbourne community is a very generous.
If you're wealthy, you're going to go to Gehenna. Well,
just 1 second.
I think it's very racist.
No, just like Melbourne community, everybody says Melbourne community is a very generous community. What you went to every person in Melbourne and you asked them for tzedakah. I mean, on the whole, people here are very generous. So the same thing in bubble. The Gemara is just using this as an anecdote, not that this is the reason why we're saying that. This is just an anecdote. The main thing is the next part of the pasuk. He accused them that they don't have Jewish blood running through their veins. They are all descendants from the Erev Rav. How do I know that? The Chesiv, because it says in the pasuk, by the Ir and Adachas, after you destroy the Ir and Adachas, it says there, Hashem should give you pity, Hashem will give you the power of compassion, and you should have compassion. And the next part of the pasuk is like Hashem swore to your ancestors, as if to say, you have compassion, then you're following the lineage of your ancestors. If you have Rachmanis, you're a descendant from Avram. Avram was the most compassionate person. Know that. If you don't have that idea of Rachmanis, very strong statement. But that's what he's saying here. That if you're not compassionate, you're not generous, then you're not a descendant from Avram Avinu. But talking about this person, he tried to do business. Okay, nobody knew who he was. They didn't want to invest with him. Then he asked for tzedakah, and nobody wanted to help him. So Rav Nosson bar Abba said, name of Rav. Anybody who doesn't have his own panasa, and he constantly needs to ask others for assistance, the world is totally dark for me. There's nothing to look forward to. It says in pasuk, if he's removed from bread, he doesn't know where it's going to come to his hand, then it's dark. He has nothing to look forward to. We had that in the Teichah. Rav Chizda says, it's not a life. His living is not called living. We learned, talking about living is not called living. The Gemara says something very interesting, especially this week's parsha, that it's all about the relationship of a man and a woman. So Tanabam we learned. Gimel, there are 3 people that chayim ein chayim. It's not called a life. Now we had this in Arab Psachim, but there we talked about people who have a bad temper, people who are extremely fastidious, and so on. Here he said, and people are very, very compassionate. And Rabbi Yosef said, I have all 3 faults, and therefore, my life is not much of a life. But here the Gemara says something else. 3 people's life, you cannot, it's not constitute, you cannot constitute as living. And what are they? Elohim. If you can unfortunately afford your own, and you always have to ask others for help. Number 1. Number 2, someone whose wife controls his life, a henpecked husband. And number 3, somebody that is afflicted, and the afflictions rule that person's life. We're going to have an Asayich of the Peilim there. Rav Shimon Yochai's son, Rabbi Lazar, he had full of terrible Yisurim afflictions, but he would say, good, he would talk to his problems that he had, and then when he didn't want it, he would say, go away right now, I'm not interested in your tzoros. So he controlled his afflictions, not the other way around. The Yesh Oim, others say, you only own one item of clothing, and if you have lice on it or other things, you can't get rid of it because you can't wash it because it's the only item of clothing you have. So how could the Tanakama doesn't include that? So the Gemara, no, you can remove the lice and other things by hand. You don't have to necessarily wash it and launder it. So therefore, he didn't count it. Okay, back to Syria's Gemara. Mishnah. Ein shoivlin es acheres. You're not allowed to break if you want to roast fish on a spit or on a grill. The problem is that the parts of the fish that touch the grill will get totally burnt, and inside the fish might be raw. It doesn't work. So what they would do is they would put clay shards between the fish and the grill, so that so that the fish shouldn't burn, or they would put some kind of a paper there it shouldn't burn. The paper itself didn't catch on fire. So you're not allowed to rip the paper, the baking paper. You're not allowed to break the clay shards in order to support the fish on Yom Tov. Because these, even if you hold machshirei oichel nefesh permitted, but you could have done this before Yom Tov. What they would do is they would take the clay shard, soak it in water, or the paper and soak it in water, and then put it on the spit. So therefore the paper didn't really burn. But meanwhile, it protected the fish. The fish shouldn't burn either. Ein shoivin es acheres. You don't break the clay shard. Can you cut the paper on Yom Tov? Litzlis boy in order to grill. Meliach, fish. We call them fish meliach because it's usually salted. The ein gorfin tanav crime. No, can you clear out an oven if bits and pieces from the oven falls inside it, and you're not allowed to go ahead and clean up because you're fixing the oven. You cannot fix an object. It's a masakin mona. And this is according to Rashi. This is according to the opinion that machshirei oichel nefesh are forbidden on Yom Tov. But remember, according to Rabbi Yehuda, machshirei oichel nefesh, if you couldn't do it before Yom Tov, you could do it on Yom Tov. So if these pieces fell on Yom Tov, you could clear out the oven. Avol mekafshim, what you could do is flatten out. Let's say the oven is not smooth. You can take a little shovel or whatever and flatten the oven out, and because you're not really fixing anything up. The ein makifin shtei chavius, nor can you bring two barrels next to each other, lispais alein es hakdeda, and to place on top of these two barrels a pot. I'll do that. The ein soimchin es hakdeda bebikas. Why can't you do the previous thing about taking two barrels and then placing them on top of that? We'll soon see. It's called an oil. You are making like a building. You cannot do that. The ein soimchin es hakdeda bebikas. Nor can you take a piece of wood that broke on Yom Tov, or a piece of wood, and use that to support the keli, because the wood that you have is only meant to be used for firewood. As far as any other purpose, it's like muktzah, and therefore you cannot use it to support a keli. V'chein bedelis, and the same thing by a door. Right now, the Gemara doesn't know exactly what it means to say by a door, and the Gemara thinks that maybe you want the pot to support a door, which obviously you can't. And the Gemara will explain, we're talking about putting the wood there to hold the door up. Because this Mishnah holds that you can only use the wood for the purpose that you intended, which is firewood. Again, it could hold a muktzah. Nor can you use a stick to control your animal to walk on Yom Tov. Again, because right now the Gemara thinks that the wood should not be used only for the purpose. And later on, the Gemara will say the reason is because it looks like you're taking it to the fair, so then it's only forbidden if it's in the Rosh Hashanah. But Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon matter. Rabbi Shimon's son says you're allowed to use the stick. Think about my timer. What is the reason? What is the reason you cannot do break the clay shard and all that? Become a second mana, because you're creating a new purpose. It has a purpose, a keli, and you cannot do it. Using it to hold the fish up, you cannot do that. The ain't golfin tana v'karaim, nor can you clean out oven. Only can go from mutzah, if you have no choice. And the only way you can do that is if you clean out, you're allowed to. Why? Because we don't hold like the Mishnah, we hold like Rabbi Yehuda, that machshirei oichel nefesh, that you could not have done prior to Yom Tov, you can fix up. So therefore, you can remove the bits and pieces that are sticking out, that fell down into the oven, and clear it out. The visa de Rabbi, the wife of Rabbi, a brick fell inside the oven on Yom Tov. They could have done it prior, but this is only machshirei oichel nefesh. I want you to know that I want good bread. Get rid of that brick. In other words, even though it's machshiri oichel nefesh, I follow the law. The law is like Rabbi Yehuda. Amalei Rabbi Lishmaya, Rabbi said to his gabbai, Tovali bar Avza, I want you to go ahead and grill for me a kachke, a goose, and his dyer mecharecha. And what do you call it? And be careful that you don't end up burning it. In other words, clear out the oven so that everything is smooth and clear, and there's nothing sticking out so that part of it gets burnt and part of it done. Again, same idea. I heard from Acha from the city of Hutzel, the mar that you, our teacher, that you go ahead and you seal your oven shut. How do you seal your oven shut? By making cement. So you go ahead and you make cement and you're mixing it to cement so that the heat remains inside the oven. How can you do that? You're not allowed to. That's called lisha. You're kneading. You're not allowed to knead cement. Amalei, he says, not true. Anan, we araksa de poras amchinan. We use the sand that's around the river Poras, and because the sand is very, very moist, we don't have to be magabel. We don't have to knead. We just take that sand, put it around, all the openings around the oven, and that seals it. But I also want you to know that we already determined yesterday which sand we're taking, so we've set it aside, so it's not muktzah in any way. Abina said, "V'kitma shari." But ashes, you're allowed to, because ashes mixed with water is not really kneading at all.
So if you seal the oven, how do you open it up on Shabbos or Yom Tov?
Not a seal that you. It's the problem here was not a seal that's breaking. It's more like covering all the cracks and crevices. The problem here was that you were kneading lush. You were doing 139 malachas. So you're saying it's not kneading at all, because we just took the sand that was already ready, fill the hole, but it's not breaking or building a permanent thing. But Ravina says kit mashali ashes are permitted. So Rashi learns ashes mixed with water. It's not really kneading. Taisa disagrees totally. He holds that ashes mixed with water is also considered kneading. He says all it means is you're filling the few cracks in the oven walls itself, and you're filling it so the fire shouldn't escape. And you're not mixing any water. You're just filling it with ashes. That's it. Now I'll bring two barrels together. If you're sitting in the bathroom, remember those days they sat outside there, and they used to take two stones and sit on it, and that's how that was their bathroom. So avonim shabeisa kisa, you take two stones, you're allowed to bring them together. Mutar l'tzadud b'yom tov. You're allowed to bring two stones alongside each other on Yom Tov, because you're sitting on it, and based on the Mishnah, you would have thought you're not allowed to. Says the Gemara, Eisvei Rabba Nachman. So Rabba asked Rab Nachman a question, or Rabba asked. It says clearly on Mishnah, you're not allowed to bring two barrels together and place a pot on top of that. You totally misunderstood. There's no problem bringing two barrels together. The problem is bringing two barrels together and then you place something on top of that. You just created oil. You just created a temporary hut. You have walls, you have a ceiling, you're not allowed to do that. Interesting. The Rabba, the young one, said to Ravashi, the minor one, according to this, if you want to build yourself a chair on Yom Tov or a bench on Yom Tov, the light of it Allah, so you're not really making an oil. It should be permitted, right? You should be able to make a bench on Yom Tov because you're not really making an oil at all. So the Gemara says, and it's a permanent structure, but according to you, it's not really an oil because you're not building walls on a thing on top. So he says, the Torah says you're not allowed to build any permanent structure. It doesn't matter whether it has walls on the ceiling. You're not allowed to build any permanent structure. Our discussion here is binyan aray la'asr Torah, a temporary building the Torah never asked. The Gozu Rabbanan of binyan aray, the rabbis came along and said, but a temporary structure is forbidden because next time you build a permanent one. Binyan kava, and over here, by a bathroom, there's no issue whatsoever, because covered abriyas, we are relaxed. We relax certain rules because the human dignity is very important. Amar Yehuda says, if you want to build a bonfire on Yom Tov, like they used to build a bonfire, they built wood, like on the four sides, they had wood stacked up, and then they built on top of like a teepee, on top there. So that's like building a tent. So he says a very important rule. These fires, this bonfire. If you build first the teepee on top and then put the walls on the side, you're allowed to. Notice you have a few people standing there. One guy holds the teepee on top, and the other guys put the wood. That's not the normal way of building an edifice. But milmata l'mayla, first you build the wood around it, and then you build upwards. Also, that is forbidden because that looks like you're building a structure. V'chein beis, so the same thing with eggs. Now, what exactly is eggs? So Rashi learns if you have like a metal tray that has holes in it that you can put eggs inside there, don't put the metal tray on the fire and then fill it with the eggs inside. Rather, first put the eggs inside the metal tray, the holes, and then put the thing on the fire. Otherwise, it looks like you're building something. The chenke data, and the same thing applies to a pot. If you want to put on 2 barrels, first to hold the pot above and then put the 2 barrels underneath it. The ceiling, then the walls. The chen puria, the same thing when it comes to a bed, that if you want to build a bed, first have the mattress or the springboard and then put the legs underneath. The chen chavish, the same thing with barrels. That's Rashi. Completely.
This TP that he's building, is this for eating or is it just
On fire to cook.
Oh, heat?
Cook. Yes.
You also have for heat as well?
Yeah. A Yom Tov, you're allowed to do these things, right? So, so we're saying here is on Yom Tov, when you're building the structure, this is how you should do it. Taisa totally disagrees with Rashi. Taisa says that the problem of oil is like a bed. The problem is he says, how come everybody puts a table together? In those days, they used to just have 4 legs and then put a cover on it, and that was a table. How would they all do that? So Taisa says, if you have legs and you put a top, there's no problem whatsoever. Oil is if only you have walls. If you have walls and then put something on top of that, then we have a problem of oil. And the case of the eggs, he says, look at Rashi. He says eggs, well, you put 2 eggs on the bottom, and then you put an egg on top of that. And then that egg on top of that, since you have walls on the side, the Taisa says even 2 walls consider walls, then we have an issue. And the same thing with bed.
Using concrete to fill in the holes of an oven, isn't it boiler?
But we're not talking about, but we're not talking
we had it before.
They were using ashes. You use ashes, not concrete, to fill the hole. You're talking about ceiling over there. They use sand that was by the river. They use sand by the river, and they it wasn't burning. The oven is full. The oven is complete. It's a perfect oven. All you're doing is
holes in it.
In the case of cracks, you put ashes in them. So that's not really, it's not really anything. It's not going to last. And the case of sealing it up, you just want the fire not to blow out. So the case of the bed, Taisa says, is talking about that the beds have sides that go to the ground, not just 4 legs and a mattress. That's not a problem. Taisa. Only if you have walls and then you put a thing on top. You always have the top first before you put the walls down. And that's the whole discussion, by the way, of an umbrella. Because an umbrella is like you're making an oil. You're not allowed to open an umbrella on Shabbos and on Yom Tov. According to the Native Yehuda, it's Mahatayra, because you're having when you open it, the walls and the ceiling happen at the same time. And therefore that's considered building an oil. And even if you open it before Shabbos, he says, and the Mishnah Berurah talks about it at length, even if you open it before Shabbos, lying on the ground there before Shabbos is not a wall and a ceiling. It's when you lift it on top of your head, now it serves the purpose. So it doesn't help having that open.
And what happens if you have a raincoat and you put it over your head? Is that also the same situation?
No, that's a garment. But for example, a baby pusher, and you have this cover that you put on, and sometimes they have this plastic on the sides.
Yeah.
It's like a thing. So the Mishnah Berurah wants to say you should have it already, down before Shabbos, so before Yom Tov, and then they can add the walls later. That's not a problem, but you should have the lid down, or at least partly down, so that you're not really creating something, or have a little bit open, and then you just roll it out further. It's like the cover of a sukkah. When you're doing Shabbos and Yom Tov, you have to have a little bit open, and then you can just extend it.
So if you had your umbrella open the whole time, that would be okay.
No, unless maybe if the umbrella was upstanding the whole time, you have it hanging straight up.
Yeah,
that's an interesting question. They don't talk about that, but that would be an interesting question. What would the din be then?
An umbrella doesn't have walls.
Yeah, they do, because it's a slope. Remember we learned slope like a sukkah. A slope can be walls.
Right.
You don't have a flat umbrella. Nobody has a flat umbrella. Doesn't work. That's right. You remember we had they used to have years ago an umbrella that was a round bubble that completely covered you down to your waist.
Yeah.
Remember those umbrellas?
No.
Okay, maybe they never came to Australia. But it was very popular in the US. And Anyway, so they talked all about then about oil. But your question about an umbrella that's already upstanding in the right way, and then you just move it over to your head. Interesting question. Whether that would be a problem with oil or not.
That's probably how people do it today.
I don't know.
People who carry the umbrella do it that way.
I don't know. Okay, does somebody say you're allowed to? The reason why it might be a problem is
You're
because
doing it, so I'm assuming that must be the case.
I'll tell you the only reason why I think there might be a problem is it doesn't serve any purpose as a roof or a wall while it's in the house. So it doesn't take on the idea of a roof and a wall until you take it outside. I don't remember. I don't
Aren't
remember
they
seeing-
making a new tent every time they take 4 steps?
Sorry?
Every time you go 4 other ummers, you're making a new tent, aren't you? Or you're transporting the tent.
No. Once it's a tent, it's a tent. And once it's a tent, it's a tent. So you're not making anything new. Doesn't matter about the carrying part. Talking about there's a native or something. Anyway, everyone should